Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History and our first of our weekend Q&As, Ask Me Anything, where you can bring up any historical topic you would like and I will answer it in a friendly neighborhood manner. We bring you friendly history every day, 24/7, 365 or 366, shorts, long-form videos every Mondays and Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and of course our Q&As every Friday and Saturday, usually at 6 p.m. Today we're doing it a little earlier because of errands I have to run later in the afternoon, evening time. So some errands I'm running made it extremely hard to do our usual 6 p.m. start, so I'm doing it at noon today on the West Coast, or 1 in the Mountain Time, 2 Central, 3 over in New York and places like that, the Eastern Seaboard. Due to a heat wave, I am not wearing my usual smoking jacket. I have ditched that for today. Trying to dress a little bit down in some shorts and a light polo, and it's still a little sweltering in here, but for the next hour or so, I will be answering all of your questions related to history and social studies. We usually do that every Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then Sundays at 4 is the live stream lecture. And this Sunday, I will be talking about the history of Mother's Day a little bit, something I've talked about here on the channel before, but a quick tribute there. And then I will also be discussing another historical topic, because it's not going to be enough for a full hour. So I've got 2 historical topics coming up on Sunday that I think everyone will really appreciate. And today is obviously just my Q&A, Ask Me Anything, where I answer all of your questions, queries, yens, whatever you have regarding particular historical and social studies topics, geography, geopolitics, past and present, the humanities. I'm here to answer as much of that as possible because they're all related to my field of expertise, which is history and historical studies. So again, welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we bring you history in a friendly neighborly manner. And if you like history, consider liking and subscribing, getting the logarithms, everything. All of that great stuff. And I've already seen Harsonet holding down the chat as my moderator. Thank you for joining us, Hars. And Harry's here too, a longtime Friendly Neighborhood historian. Great to see both of you guys. Thank you for joining us on this Friday evening over in the UK, Harry. Hopefully you're enjoying your Friday night. So let's see here. Hars and Harry with 2 good questions right off the bat. Hars is asking, can next Sunday be Reformation's impact? I might be able to discuss. It's going to be kind of a weird shift towards Mother's Day to that. What I find fascinating, and I'll talk about this on Sunday, is I could talk about both Mother's Day and Father's Day, but Father's Day is celebrated at a much less clip, much less money is spent, much less celebration is given, much less attention is given to Father's Day than to Mother's Day. Father's Day is a later holiday. It was developed at a later time. So maybe I'll just talk about both of those and then do a little bit of a Q&A, or maybe let you go early and celebrate your mothers and all of that great stuff. Do I think Margaret Thatcher was a good prime minister? I think in the way that Reagan was a good president, Thatcher was a good prime minister. Not every single thing about her is obviously excellent or wonderful, but I think Thatcher changed the political landscape in Britain, and the impact of her ability to lead and her governance remains one of the most storied parts of modern British political history. And I don't think there's ever been a prime minister or world leader with the gravitas of a Margaret Thatcher. I think when it comes to prime ministers in Britain's history, when you look at impact alone, her and Churchill are at the top of the list. It's not even close to anyone else. You have other prime ministers, Walpole, William Pitt, Tony Blair, even Bojo, who have had particularly impactful legacies in British politics and history, but no one like Thatcher and Churchill when it comes to their influence. Why does Tony Blair continue to have such a hold over the Labour Party? I don't know that he has a hold over the Labour Party. Is he one of their leading candidates for the prime ministership? What position does he hold in the government currently? I believe the Labour Party is in charge there. Oh, maybe Hars. That would be good. So maybe next Sunday we can do the Reformation history. I'd be happy to do that. And yes, a lot of people are wondering about the new Pope. I've done a few videos about him. Robert Prevost, a Peruvian-American Pope or bishop who was from Chicago and was made a cardinal by Pope Francis, which made him eligible to become a pope. And then a surprising election. No one expected an American to be elected by the conclave of Catholic cardinals, which is a group of bishops who are contained in the Vatican. And the College of the Cardinals meets there. They are sequestered. They have no outside connections, and there is nothing from the from inside going out or outside going in. If you want to learn more about this, check out the movie with Ralph Fiennes, Conclave, which has a few things that most Catholics would spurn, but is a very, very interesting telling of the political process of how the Pope is selected. And Ralph Fiennes is one of the best actors of ever. So please check that out. But definitely, I think that um, so that process surprised a lot of people, whereas there were certain candidates who seemed formidably strong, Piazzaria, Luis Tegal, or Robert Serra. It ended up being Cardinal Prevost, who was elected by the cardinals to become the next Bishop of Rome, the Roman Catholic leader, the Pope, which Pope is a derivative of the term Father. He is the Holy Father who oversees about 1.4 billion Catholics. Prevost is the first American pope. He's an Augustinian based in the studies of St. Augustine, one of the Catholic Church's most important spiritual leaders, a doctor of the church, meaning he's a theological authority for most Catholics, and many Christians adore St. Augustine. He wrote the first autobiography in history with his Confessions. Quite a fascinating character. So, yeah. I wouldn't. Yes, I would say I wouldn't say everything about Margaret Thatcher is obviously perfect, Harry. I obviously have a problem with dependence on imported energy. Yeah. So, yeah, I think Tony Blair is a fascinating character for a lot of Brits and for a lot of British politicians because he ran a Labour government that was sensitive to the neoconservatism of the early 2000s. He was close with President Bush. He was seen as a bridge builder and a bipartisan. And for that reason and those reasons alone, Blair stands out unlike other Labour prime ministers. So. I'm not sure. So his influence is obviously that of the next president of the United States. So do you think you are giving an unrealistic and unreasonable expectation of Coolidge? So the Calvin Coolidge thing. Hopefully everybody has checked out my. I'm gonna wipe off a little sweat here. Hopefully everybody has checked out my video on my tier ranking of the U.S. presidents, which came out Monday. And today at 8 p.m., we have long-form videos dropping every Monday and Friday. My video on ranking the English monarchs will come out. So, Harry, hopefully you agree with my tier list there. Harst is asking, do you think you are giving an unrealistic and unreasonable expectation of Coolidge? I think that Calvin Coolidge was a really good president. I think he's underrated. I think he oversaw a time of prosperity and growth for the United States that is really unrivaled to the most extent in the modern era. I just think that he ignored certain signs that could have prevented the Great Depression. It would have been very interesting to see what he would have done had he been president and the stock market had crashed. So, yes, Peter McLaughlin saying that Blair and Bush are war criminals. That's a common accusation. The idea that they lied, soldiers died. Obviously, the interference in the Middle East by the United States and its allies in the early 2000s, these regime changes, exporting democracy, didn't work. The United States should know better by now to put their thumbs on the scales with influencing foreign governments in the Middle East and how they will be organized. It didn't work in Iraq. It didn't work in Afghanistan. It really didn't work. It kind of had a whiplash effect in Egypt. It's not working in Syria, and it didn't work in Libya. Despite all of the U.S. effort to arm rebels in these areas, ever since the fall of the Shah in Iran, the United States has been totally out of touch with what to do with Middle Eastern governments. Allowing regime changes, facilitating regime changes, none of it has worked. The Shah of Iran was a despot who was very unlikable for many, many reasons, but he was a reliable ally of the United States, and his loss of power seemed like a great idea at first for liberal governments, but then the radical Islamic Republic of Iran overthrew any idea of real democracy in that country, overthrew any idea of Republican government, and you had the rise of the mullahs and a state that is not only, and it's not just about Israel, but is devoted to the destruction of everything Western. So, Prashnath, thank you for joining us. I am from America. I don't say exactly where in the United States I am from. Some people can piece it together if they want, but yeah. So, thank you for joining us from Iraq. If you can type in English, that would be helpful, in English characters. Yeah. Bush lied, but Blair was misinformed. Bush was misinformed too. I wouldn't say outright that George W. Bush lies. Him and Colin Powell were certainly misinformed at the very least. So let me see here. Hars. Well, Talking about Calvin Coolidge, well, he ignored certain things not because he genuinely didn't care, but because of other opinions like his economic policy and ignorance during that time. So it is unrealistic of an expectation. What's unrealistic is not listening to your Secretary of Commerce, who becomes president after you and then gets blamed for something he didn't cause. What Herbert Hoover deserves flack for, and this is why he's in the F tier of my video, please go check that out, by the way. Hars, if you could put the social medias in the chat, by the way, and maybe a link to that video, that would be really helpful for people here on the chat. But basically, and by the way, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. If you like history, yada yada, like and subscribe. But anyways, Hars, Calvin Coolidge was a perfectly good president who did a lot of great things. The problem is that he pushed the blame onto Hoover for not doing what Hoover warned him needed to be done in the wake of the Great Depression. Hoover's an F-tier president because instead of actually fixing any of the problems, he just complained endlessly. So, Sarfak, hello, thank you for joining us. When are we going to start treating other countries that support the terrorist groups like the terrorists themselves? What do you mean by that? I don't know what you're meaning. You are joining us from an underground bunker in India. Thank you for joining us. And Bush and the U.S. administration gave Britain incorrect intelligence. And according to Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, independence inquiries and investigations, the United States purposefully lied to Britain. To Britain. I don't think so. I think they were both misled. The evidence seems to bear this out. Were all of the members of the Bush administration and the upper echelons of the U.S. government ignorant of the information there and then used it to basically promulgate war and all sorts of destabilization? Absolutely. I don't think that George W. Bush himself was keen on that. I think Dick Cheney might be the one who deserves the blame for that. Yeah. Well, Harry, the Americans have helped the British a lot more than the British have helped the Americans, which I know that you don't like, but it's true. So I can understand why British intelligence would just depend on the United States. And I am not Mormon, but thank you for thinking that, I guess. Do you need Instagram followers view light? Yeah, sure. If Hars will put the Instagram, he just did, you guys can join me there. Facebook, X, and the like. So please like and subscribe if you haven't and follow me on those platforms. Thank you for joining us from Iraq. Morgan, I appreciate you subscribing. Very nice of you. Gaia Han, great to see you. Yes, an American Pope from Chicago, Robert Prevost. I've been talking about him a lot here on the channel. Hars was already asking about him. I don't know what to think of him. I'm not addressing this from a spiritual, theological lens. What will be interesting is his cultural and political opinions coming from his particular perspective. And the Catholic Church seems to be this institution that is in flux right now. You have the death of a pope who was more on the liberal side after you had two very conservative, well-known conservative papacies. So the church seems to have a lot of questions about certain issues related to LGBTQ people, migration, climate change. These are things Francis brought to the forefront of his pontificate, and we'll see how much Pope Leo XIV wants to do that as well. Sales is asking a great question. What do you think the piece of history that changed the world forever? I think the invention of the assembly line by Henry Ford might be the most important invention in human history. And I believe that because the mass production of goods and services, which allowed capital deepening, which allowed many of the workers their rights and wages that they deserved for a long time coming, that unions could only partially secure, comes from the invention of the assembly line. It changed the status of workers. It changed mass production. The mass production of different goods made them a lot cheaper, a lot more quickly, and it made it a lot more common for consumer goods to get out to the middle and lower classes at a much better rate. Bush used the British Prime Minister as some person who can be used to get Dick Cheney and his other cabinet members to support his activities. I think it's the other way around. I think Bush was used. I think George W. Bush is not a great president by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's a guy with good ideas who just didn't know how to lead. Right, he's the Republican version of Jimmy Carter. What's the right time in your state? Again, don't reveal it. Thank you for subscribing. I appreciate that, Furquan. We went to Iraq. We went to Afghanistan. We've supported America in nearly everything it's done. It's done one ally that's done more for the U.S. in the 20th century than Britain. That's true. Definitely. The United States' greatest ally are the British, and the British greatest ally is the United States. Look who made the first tariff deal with America? The British. Yeah, gunpowder would be one of the biggest inventions too. Gunpowder was invented and utilized by the Chinese long before the Europeans got it. The Europeans perfected what was already something available. I wouldn't say gunpowder changed warfare, which changes societies and history to be sure. It's definitely in the top five or maybe even the top three. So, Caden, enough of your skippity. You are losing Riz. Um, okay, thank you for doing that. I really appreciate that. You're a doctor, and I appreciate your multilingual abilities. I did quite like Francis on a lot of fronts, despite me being a gun owner. I have a lot more liberal leanings. You do you. Let me see here. Carter greater than Bush too. I don't think so. I think it's equal. Carter might be a little bit better than Bush too. On my tier list, he's a little bit better, but it's not. But it's close. Is there a war going on between India and Pakistan? There's about to be. Can you say hi to my friend? No, because your friend doesn't exist. And now, neither do you. So, let me see here. America has just flat tariffed up 10%, is basically threatening to leave us defenseless. Why do you need American defense? If Britain is so incredible, why do you need the American military wing? I mean, Harry, you can't have it both ways. You can't criticize America's constant behaviors or Britain and laud Britain's and not see the huge amount of aid and support that Britain gets from the United States. I'm not saying the United States is perfect and Britain is always awful, obviously not, but it's not there are plenty of things that the United States does for Great Britain that Great Britain at this point can't even do for itself. In my opinion, Jennifer, there was already a World War III. So the 7 Years' War in the 1750s was the First World War. Then you have the Great War, the war to end all wars, 1914 to 1918. That's World War II. World War III is the Germans and the Japanese. This would be World War IV. So to answer your question, and now that we're done with the technicality, I'm not sure. I don't know how it would create a world war. I don't know how things will line up and who would support Pakistan and who would support India. My imagination is the West would generally support India. Russia and China might lean towards Pakistan. Who knows? China's interest is in securing Tibet. India's interest is in getting Tibet its freedom. The tensions between the Indians and the Chinese have been quite high over the last 10 years. So yeah, John, you're right. Military inventions obviously change a lot, so they get high on the list. But I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb. It's kind of a hot take. I will also say there are many other inventions we haven't even mentioned: the radio, the phonograph, electric lights, incandescent light bulbs, these things, trains, steam engines. Obviously, those have their place in the sun as well. I mean, chariots have their place in the sun. Shurkin, great to see you. It goes well. Just enjoying life. Running the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. I'm not in my usual smoking jacket because it is hot as all heck out here. But great to see you. I really appreciate it. And I'm ready to talk about Spear of a Nation when you are. Music of Jordan, hello. Thank you for joining the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Vishwajit is asking, why is the IMF giving money after seeing Pakistan's credibility? Who are they giving money to? I don't see that the Tories are hallowing your armed forces. I'd just like to point out we did this under the Labour administration, and thank God the UK has stopped blindly supporting the US since Iraq. That's fair. I agree with you. Yeah, and look at what happened when the US went to Syria. Syria is worse now, somehow, than it was under Assad. Bashan, hello, thank you. Printing press is definitely up there, too. That's a great invention. Wow, you are joining us at 1 a.m. I appreciate you. Well, if you need to fall asleep, there's nothing like the sound of my voice and everything that I share to put people to sleep. Hello, Mom. Nice guess, Jennifer. I appreciate you thinking that I'm 19. I'm older than that, but I appreciate that. My birthday's coming up. My birthday's in a couple weeks. So I'm a Taurus, but that's as personal as I'm going to get. What life experience do you have to talk about the topics? Well, trivial. I have life experience to know that it's ridiculous to do all caps because it sounds like you're screaming at nothing or yelling into a Wendy's drive-through. So, did papal infallibility exist in the medieval church? There was a sense that the Bishop of Rome, this is why the Orthodox, Eastern, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox churches are not split apart from the Roman Catholic Church. Other than other theological differences, one of the biggest distinguishing factors between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church is the Pope. Basically, the belief that not only was the Roman Catholic Pope supreme, but that he was unable, when he spoke as the leader of the church, to make error on theological positions, really isolated the Orthodox Church. So that idea was developing at that time, and it wasn't ever codified, I think, until the 1800s. But Catholics believed that for a long time before that. Jennifer, I read, I watch videos, I do everything I can to engage my multimodal mind in the study of social sciences. So, talk about the papacy and provost. I've been doing that a lot. So hopefully, maybe you can go back and watch that. But basically, first American pope has a Peruvian background too, probably a close connection to Francis. We don't know exactly what he will do. He seems to be kind of this chillaxed figure, Pope Leo the 14th. Yeah, that's true. Electricity is a good one. Trivial, I agree with you there. How do you know all of this? I already answered that. Oh, jolly good. What are your thoughts on that most interesting organization? So Shurkin has been asking me, I don't know how to pronounce the African name, so I'm just going to call it the English translation, the Spear of a Nation. This was the militant wing of the African National Congress. Many African countries, when they were gaining their independence from European colonizers like the French, the British, the Spanish, had organizations dedicated to their independent rights. There was an Indian National Congress led by Mahatma Gandhi, which advocated civil disobedience and nonviolence, and eventually won their independence from Britain after what you call World War II, what I consider to be World War III, against the Nazis in Imperial Japan. So the African National Congress was one of the organizations in South Africa that was demanding independence from the British, and then after that, the end of apartheid and the end of Afrikaans, or Boer. Afrikaans is the language, but the Boers were a group of Dutch settlers who gained political control over South Africa when the British left in the 1960s. So the majority of people in South Africa were black Africans, yet they did not have political autonomy or power, and they went from British rule to being ruled by the Dutch, who implemented racist apartheid, which was a form similar to segregation in the United States, that discriminated African Americans, disenfranchised them, made it harder for them to succeed socially, politically, and economically. And so the African National Congress, kind of being inspired by Gandhi, started off as a nonviolent civil rights organization, practicing civil disobedience, sit-ins, protests, in order to gain legitimacy and legitimization, but they would eventually gain them their independence from not just the British, but from the apartheid of the Dutch Boers who ruled over South Africa politically at the time. Unfortunately, with the disenfranchisement of so many South Africans, the delegitimizing of the African National Congress, and the eventual arrest of Nelson Mandela, its leader, many people turned towards more violent means, including several massacres, attacks by the government, repression, much more violent than what was seen in the American South, although acts of terrorism like the bombing of the Birmingham church were quite common in South Africa during this time. So basically the African National Congress, some of its leadership decided to develop a more militant wing that was ready to fight for their rights, or at least protect themselves from the Boer government that was willing to violently repress them whenever they wanted in order to maintain apartheid and discrimination. This organization became known as the Spear of the Nation. They were an offshoot not directly affiliated with the African National Congress, but obviously in sympathy with their agenda. They wanted a South Africa ruled by Africans, and they wanted to achieve it even using violent means. This has led many in the West to consider them a terrorist organization. They used all the same subterfuge, bombings, attacks in order to achieve their ends. Necklacing was something they would do, where they would put a tire over someone's head and then light it on fire. And torture and things like this, and what Americans call enhanced interrogation, were quite common with the Spear of the Nation. Basically seeing themselves as the militant wing. And Shuriken asked me a great question. He asked me if I consider them to be a terrorist organization. After doing research and everything, I would say yes, with an asterisk. It's hard. I lean one way or the other depending on the day. Obviously, the continual cries of liberty and freedom fell on very deaf ears in the Boer government of the Dutch in South Africa. But these people did engage in, they fought fire with fire. And that is not eventually what led to South Africa gaining its, ending apartheid, gaining majority African rule, Nelson Mandela becoming the leader of the African people in the 1990s, F.W. Clerk and him ending apartheid and both winning the Nobel Prize for their efforts. The efforts of the Spear of the Nation are an understandable form of extremism, yet extremism they still are. So hopefully that's worth the wait, Shuriken. I know you've been asking about that a long time, and I'm sorry if I haven't gotten to your question. I'm going through the chat, and we'll get there as soon as I can. If you have a question, consider putting it in the chat, a topic you'd like me to discuss historically. I hope to answer it with the same vim and vigor that I just answered about the Spear of the Nation. Do you know the history of India and Pakistan? This war between two nuclear nations will make a history. Well, yes, it'd be the first war between, I think it would be the first war in history between two nuclear-powered nations that everybody knows has nuclear power. Here's the problem, okay? Unless you want to consider China and the United States, but China didn't have the nuclear weapons in the 1950s. So India, for most of its history, has been Hindu. Hinduism is the oldest religion in the world. Judaism is close. Jainism is close. But Hinduism is probably the oldest established religion in the world. And with it comes all of the accoutrements of a religion. Social, cultural, moral, ethical behaviors modeled around the religious formulae of Hinduism have impacted the Indian subcontinent greatly. India got its name from the Indus River civilization, which is technically in Pakistan, which is why Prime Minister Modi is trying to change the name of India to its ancient Sanskrit name of Bharat, because he does not believe that he wants any affiliation with Pakistan, and that includes the Indus River Valley. The Ganges is the river that runs through India, one of the largest in the world. I think it's fourth or fifth. So basically, in the 1300s, Islam showed up, and Islam conquered India and has had several successful kingdoms and empires that have ruled over India, like the Delhi Sultanate or the Mughals. And during that time, the constant tension was balancing Hindu and Islamic practices, and growing tensions between them have broken out in horrifying amounts of violence. Religious toleration by both the Mughals and the British really didn't get as far as they wanted. So the continual fighting between Hindu and Muslim factions eventually led to the British deciding, when they decolonized the subcontinent, to split it into three nations, or two nations. Pakistan, West Pakistan, and East Pakistan, with India in the middle. The areas with majority Muslim population would become a single entity divided by India, a Hindu majority area in the middle. The West was West Pakistan, the East was East Pakistan, and in 1971 they broke away to become Bangladesh. The Hindus remain the majority population in India. There are still many Hindus in Pakistan, and there are still many Muslims in India itself. So the growing tensions over this division, both politically, geographically, and of course religiously, continue to have all sorts of bad impact. And that continual divide has led to the most disputed area between them being the hotbed of militant activity. That is Kashmir. Part of Kashmir is administered by the Indians, part of it is by the Pakistanis. So the growing tensions have escalated, and it could easily lead to a war. So that's the history there. Yes, trivial. That is a good sum up of their social thing. Yuvraj, thank you for joining us. Hello. Undertaker, hello. Why are there separation in beliefs of Christianity and Islam if they both believe in the same God? Most Christians would not ascend that Islam believes in the same God. It is a Muslim belief that Christians and Muslims worship the same God. And even those who do believe they worship in the same God have certain theological understandings, the same way that Jews and Christians do, that make them different. Jews and Muslims do not believe that God has a son. So because of that, that separates them immediately from Christianity that worships the Son of God, Jesus Christ. So it's a theological understanding. Other than the fact that they're monotheistic and have the same origin text, the Old Testament, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have significant differences between each other that have led to, despite many people, especially in the more relativistic societies, the more peaceful Western societies, claiming they all worship the same God, the ideology really doesn't come out to play like that throughout history or throughout culture. That's why you have the Crusades. That's why you have persecutions of Jews by both Christians and Muslims, kind of being batted around like a ball on a tennis table. And that's why you have all of the problems in the Middle East you have today, to some extent or another. So Harry's saying, it just annoys me that we supported the U.S. through everything from 2001 to 2007, and then the U.S. has just seemingly forgotten about it and moved on. I mean, what do you want the U.S. to do? The thing with popes and kings back then, it doesn't make sense to me because the king appoints the pope or something, but then the pope is in charge of the king somehow. So Jennifer, you're actually touching on an extraordinarily important historical point, and that is the point of, I'm trying to remember the exact term of it. I think it's called sacralism, but the idea that about who is in charge. The Pope is protected by the kings and his army throughout European history. So you've got the Holy Roman Emperor in Germany, you've got Italian princes and dukes called doges, literally doges. You have the French, you have the English, they have their kings. And yes, they are supposed to protect the church and everything, but they don't elect the Pope. The Pope is technically elected by the bishops and the cardinals. Not that kings have never tried to influence or control that. And at the same time, the kings are supposed to be blessed by the popes and the cardinals and the bishops. But the idea that the king is in charge of the bishops in his land and the pope is not have been the bane of the papal existence throughout the Middle Ages, when medieval kings basically believed because a bishop was in his area, the pope couldn't replace that bishop. If that bishop died, he could replace that bishop when the bishop passed away. The Pope, claiming that spiritual authority was greater than earthly authority, because one dealt with the temporal and one dealt with the eternal, said that he had the authority to make not only religious but political decisions for different monarchs. This led to a lot of tension in Western Europe, and the idea that Western Europe was just completely monolithically controlled by the papacy at all times throughout the Middle Ages isn't true. There's a lot of control, but it's not monolithic. I don't see that in 9 days, Pakistan capitulating to India and being totally annexed by India. Wars where you have large annexations like that don't exist anymore. Jess, I don't know what you're talking about. Trivial mistakes. I consider the French-Indian or 7 Years' War of the 1750s and 60s to be the First World War. I have done a live stream lecture and a full-length video on that. Harry is saying, what do you think of Britain and France offering their nuclear umbrella to Europe? I think it's great. Britain is always in this tension of how European is it? And France is always in this tension of how often does it speak for Europe? Let me see. Which one is best, heroin or cocaine? Neither. Get clean. What did Michael Jordan say? Stop. Get some help. Yes, there's beautiful and incredible history within the Catholic Church, and that's why I study it. I'm not proposing that Catholicism is right. What I am saying is that from a historical perspective, if you're going to learn anything about Western European history, you have to learn about the Catholic Church. The earth is not flat. Did you hear about the guy who invented lifesavers? They said he made a mint. That was good. Grind, I'm answering different questions in the chat about history and social studies, so if you have one, please put it in there. Thank you for agreeing. Hot take, prison works. Mandela spent 27 years in prison and he never reoffended. Okay, then. Let me see here. Nice guess, RH, but that's not my name. Let me see. I am not South African, but I will take that as a compliment. Hello, thank you for joining the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Got a lot of nice people coming in saying hello, like Ajit and Prince Shawan and Avenger. Thank you for joining us. If you like history and social studies, like and subscribe. The Sons of Liberty are terrorists, to some extent. Between the apartheid and what's right now in South Africa, what's the difference really? No is more corrupt, possibly way beyond repair. So the problem that's happening in South Africa now that a lot of people don't know is kind of almost like the Spear of a Nation extended. because white farmers are facing disenfranchisement. Large farms and plantations that have been owned by whites for generations are facing seizure by the government, violent uprisings. When they refuse to give their land up, they are facing militaristic action by roving gangs that are sanctioned by the government, things like that. And this has been going on for a couple of years. President Trump has been addressing this, and many people see this as a kind of a reverse racism. And I believe that there's racism. I've studied too much history to think there is, that racism is monopolized by one group. It has been historically only because of the technological accesses of the Europeans to interact with other races far more than those other races had the ability to interact with them. But if you look at, but racism, racial misbehavior, prejudice, these things are human traits. And so that has been a huge issue in South Africa, kind of a reverse discrimination that has led to the seizure of lands, farmlands from white farmers. And this has happened with collectivization and the government sanctioning liquidation of a particular class of farmers in the Soviet Union and in China, and now has been happening in somewhat in South Africa. Yes, Harry, that's basically true. Was the Ottoman Empire at its peak in World War I? Was it a global power at this time? What is the context of the Ottoman Empire here, and how did the West view it? The Ottoman Empire was in decline. World War I, I'm assuming you mean the Great War, 1914 to 1918. The Ottoman Empire was in decline and only fought in the war to gain a stranglehold on the Balkans, southeastern Europe, so countries like Greece, Macedon, Bosnia, areas like that, it had been losing its influence and appeal there. And basically, the Ottoman Empire collapses in the war. It's surrounded by the British. The Arabs have a revolt in the south. The Russians are attacking from the north. Despite the failure of the Gallipoli invasion and the Dardanelles campaign, the Greeks fighting against the Turks really don't help them a lot. And because of this, the Turks really, really suffer during the war. They are a nation in decline. They don't have the resources or wherewithal of the Germans to withstand the Allies for a long period of time. And so the Ottoman Empire basically caves in like an eggshell. But before this finishes, they relocate millions of Armenians, who they believe will be partisans helping the Russians, to the Syrian desert from Armenia, and during this time do not properly provide for them, leading to the deaths of about 1 million Armenians in what is the first major genocide of the 20th century, with more, unfortunately, to come. And it's a video that I've covered, the history of the Armenian genocide, the ethnic cleansing of the Armenians by the Turks, which the Turkish government has not admitted to this time, but has agreed that war crimes were committed against the peoples of the Armenian people who were forced to flee during 1915 to 1916. So basically, the Ottoman Empire was in decline and really exposed during that war, and just completely collapsed after it. And they would have gotten even worse had Kemal Mustafa Ataturk not taken power, arranged the Treaty of Lausanne, which gave Turkey a bunch of its land and took land away from emergent Bulgaria in the early 1920s. And why did South Africa give up their nuclear weapons? Why did Ukraine give up that? Ukraine gave them up because the Soviets put nuclear weapons in Ukraine during the Cold War. So it was a sign of peace. Although attacked, right now it seems like it would be a good deterrent to the Russians. The Russians have them and have been threatening to use them for years, which the reason they haven't probably proves, A, they fear invasion by all of Europe, basically, and B, most of their nuclear technology is probably out of date and weak, which was a fear during the Cold War that turned out to be largely true. Look at the Chernobyl disaster, look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Soviet Union basically put empty silos and called them missiles in Cuba, right next to actual live nuclear weapons. I don't know why South Africa gave up theirs. I think it might have been an agreement at the end of apartheid. It might have been a peace movement by Mandela. That would be my best guess. Thomas, both sides are blaming each other for this war, and I don't know who exactly to blame. I know it started with supposedly an intelligence officer in Pakistan, an Indian intelligence officer being killed, if I'm correct. Then India retaliates by attacking Pakistan, and now we're building up to a potential war, unfortunately. Billionaire, hello, welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Yes, Jennifer, that was what happened. So typically with a Muslim government, they show religious toleration. They just tax the minority religion or the religion that wasn't in power. The Hindus have always been the majority of the Indian subcontinent. And by paying that tax, they were not forced to be drafted or convert to Islam. People who know how to act smart versus actually having smarts is almost indistinguishable. That's very true. And being wise is the ability to determine that. Thanks for that excellent top over. You made a very good, solid overview, and I agree with you for what it's worth, right down to the asterisk. I really appreciate that, sure I can. Thank you for educating me on the spirit of a nation. I know a lot about history. I'm sure you probably can tell that, but people are always bringing up things that I don't know. I go back, I check, I learn, and it helps me become a better historian. So thank you for making me better at this. And Harry's done that. Hars has done that. A lot of the great people on this channel have done that. Where are you from? I'm from the United States. I'm not going to say specifically where. You can keep guessing. I don't know if they are, Thomas. I wouldn't be fully surprised if they were. You know, Pakistan has hit 3 Indian aircrafts. I did not know that. So let's see here. Let me see. Israel, and we have a historical connection. Canadian, 100%. I like all these guesses. Canadian, South African. I'm an American. I don't share where. Toilet paper was used by Chinese emperors in the 14th century, yet it was Joseph Gaiety in 1857 who first sold individual sheets with his name on them, proving capitalists will do anything for cash. Yes, even make stuff for you to even basically clean up your crap for you. A lot of societies in the world use their left hand to wipe. I'm sorry that I'm getting this graphic, so the left hand, and so that has been part of the association with southpaws and disease or disability throughout human history. I'm southpaw, so, and I have toilet paper, so don't worry. Thoughts on milk? I don't need any, but thank you. Here it is. The vice president should get common knowledge of what's happened for the last 25 years. We shouldn't have a blanket tariff of 10% put on us. And yet here we are. We shouldn't have Britain and France be spoken about as if they're some fourth-rate irrelevant powers. I don't think that they're irrelevant. I agree with you there, Harry, but obviously they are not what they once were. And that is why the Americans think they can push them around. Francie, I'm good. I don't need your money. Let me see here. The clergy's job medieval times were basically the law, and they were kingmakers. They could be, but sometimes they weren't. The idea that there wasn't a huge... It wasn't as big of a control as we are led to believe. It's kind of a give and take. Just like the Middle Ages wasn't as dark as we are led to believe. Am I a Democrat? I don't give my political affiliation. I let people guess and figure out on their own. And I never say if they're right or wrong if they guess. Being an American, people usually guess one or the other. How old is America? Well, that depends on who you ask. And to Eam and Constantine, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. And I am not using you for money. If you like and subscribe, you can help me get monetized, though, and I appreciate that. And if you are you're using me to learn things, so I'm returning the favor to get money. Let me see here. Francie, how old is America? She was asking. The United States is about 250 years old. America is settled by the English. When you think of America, Canada and the United States in particular, about 400. Mexico in its current form of Spanish roots, about 500 years. But this land obviously was occupied by Native Americans of different groups for thousands of years, probably for the last at least 3,000 to 4,000 years. There has been a trace of Native Americans occupying North and South America. How did the U.S. become the superpower it is right now? Taking advantage of opportunities. When both world wars were fought in the 20th century and the United States was not heavily damaged by that other than the loss of life, and other countries relied on them to provide weapons and supplies, that put Western Europe in the debt of the United States both times. It allowed the American and the production militarily skyrocketed American productivity, and that combined with the indebtedness of the Europeans increased America's economic, social, and political capital all over the globe. Its occupation of Japan after this Third World War, or what you call the Second World War, helped it gain leverage in Eastern Asia. And then the continual condemnation of communism throughout the Cold War allowed the United States to legitimize many of its exploits, both for good and for bad. So the ability to produce the large influx of immigrants, the large growth of the American economy in the late 19th century led to American interventionism, basically leaving America unscratched while also gaining a foothold of influence and power in Western Europe in particular, and in Asia, and then expanding those to areas like South America and Africa. Yes, let me see. Taking a step back in the conversation, papal infallibility is largely misunderstood and only applies to proclamations made ex cathedra from the seat of Peter. These happen most infrequently. I've heard that before. It's not common for the Pope to make a definitive statement of faith, but that ability that he can is a huge divider between Catholics and Orthodox, let alone Protestants who don't believe in any sort of this authority of bishops and priests and patriarchs and popes. So thank you for joining us from India. We've got Multiverse, Pinshuan. I'm so glad to see people from India, that wonderful land, joining us. I don't know. And Francie, I believe there's been 3 world wars, so technically we're on to World War IV. I don't know who will start it. My best guess, if I were to say it were to happen soon, would be Russia attacking Poland or another UN country or NATO country. So, thank you. I'm glad that I look like that dude from the Vampire Werewolf movie. As long as he's handsome, I'll take it. Am I Russian? Am I? I'm an American. You can guess my ethnicity from there. And I am from the United States. I've been answering all that. I haven't heard it, Green, and I don't want to hear ye. After he did that at the Super Bowl, although it was a horrible troll, it's so ridiculous. I don't know if I want to listen to it. Although I do love Kanye's music when he was mentally unstable, but not just outright insane. So let me see here. Salam to you as well, Khalid. We'll see. We'll see exactly what happens in India and Pakistan, Thomas. I hope I'm sounding okay. I hope I'm coming in all right. Let me see here. Hello. Thank you for joining us. Bookie said hi. I'm beginning from America. Everybody's asking me where I'm from. It's very interesting. Usually it's Kamala or Trump, or it's Israel, Palestine, or all of that stuff. So I appreciate the more conventional questions. And this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, so if you're just joining us, consider asking a topic related to history or social studies. We've got another 15 minutes or so of a live stream. Interesting. Yeah, Xander, I think I remember you. You've been here before, and you've talked about South African history, I think. So, yes, you have. I'm so glad to see you again. That's really cool that he was involved with the nuclear power station in Coburg. My father was top advisor to King Louis. There hasn't been one in a while, so I don't know what you mean by that. Yes, why did they give up those nuclear weapons? Let me see here. They were given up and dismantled as a measure to prevent the new government from having access to this typing capability during transition power in SA. Interesting. So it was a transition of power. I thought so. I will not be at SalCon. Sorry, John. Hate to disappoint you. Thoughts on the Pope? I've talked about him a lot today. I've made a couple of videos about him. We'll see what it's like having an American Pope. I think a lot of people really don't like that idea. The hand waving, you're definitely Italian. I appreciate that. Nothing. Nothing's up with anything, Liz. Let me see here. U.S. is no longer a superpower. We will see how dumb Trump feels after this weekend. Let's see what happens in India and Pakistan. How out of 300-odd million people did the U.S. come up with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump and just top it off the dipstick called J.D. Vance? So, Harry, I think Trump's influence on the GOP obviously guaranteed that he was going to be their nominee no matter what. And Joe Biden's mental acuity and questions regarding his ability to actually run the country for another 4 years when he was already elderly and clearly showing signs of some sort of dementia leveled the playing field, and no Democrat wanted to get involved, and Kamala Harris got involved. So as much as I know you despise, and a lot of people despise President Trump and Vice President Vance, who seems to be waiting in the wings for 2028, the truth of the matter is America at this point, this happens in its history all the time. You think a party's done, and then it comes back and has a big win. This has happened to Republicans and Democrats throughout their history. It goes back and forth all the time. The Democratic Party will be back, and will be back in powerful fashion. As I look at it, from what I understand, I don't see who that's going to be. Will it be a more moderate Josh Shapiro type, the governor of Pennsylvania? Will it be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez taking the party to more progressive echelons? I don't quite know who it's going to be. they don't seem like they have quite the leader that they need right now. And Kamala Harris definitely didn't come across that way during her campaign. She didn't have enough time to do that, but I don't know that she could have, based on the hesitancy to have interviews, things like that, that really made a lot of people question if she was ready to answer hard questions. And Trump convinced everybody that the media was biased, and I think that helped him a lot and hurt her a lot. USA #1, okay then. Yep, trivial. You don't have to yell what you're saying, but yes, I might get that way, but I'll drink some water after this. JC, you're loved. Thank you for joining us. Let me see here. I'm just going through the chat. There's a lot of trolls today. Hars, hopefully he's still here. Maybe you can get rid of some of the trolling. Thank you for joining us from Uganda. I really appreciate that. Got people from Uganda, South Africa, lots of people from India. It's been a fun day. How did America lose the moral high ground to China? How has China become the defender of international institutions and the rule on if you're making an agreement with a treaty, stick to it? They haven't. By all means, they certainly haven't. Look at what they did with Tibet. China, I think a lot of people, because of the almighty dollar, whatever, or the almighty yen or yuan, I think that China, despite a lot of concerns about human rights abuses and dictatorships and communism and the bogeyman there, I think a lot of people are willing and open to China because of its hold on rare minerals and its large consortium of economic productivity. So, let me see. USA is about to lose a war to China without missiles. I don't expect there to be a war. Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of influence from China and from the Middle East in American universities, which doesn't surprise me. So Xander, they still have nuclear power. Interesting. There's nothing wrong with Indian nationalists being here as long as they like history. And now we've got an actual question about history and social studies. What's your favorite period in Russian history, and can you share with us an interesting anecdote from the period with us? Boy, that's a great question. I love Russian history. My emphasis and study is Russian history. My master's is in Russian history. I would say my favorite period of Russian history is probably that Peter the Great reform in the early 1700s, obviously making Russia a European power, which is solidified by Catherine the Great, that made Russia a world power at the end of the century. The 18th century is an extremely powerful time in Russian history where its prestige and influence grows. One of my favorite stories is the story of how all of European history changes on Christmas Day. Old style. The Russians use a different calendar, or used a different calendar at that time. So on January 7th or 6th, something like that, January 7th, 1762, Elizabeth, the Russian Tsarina, the daughter of Peter the Great, dies. The Russians are currently fighting a war with the Prussians, the 7 Years' War, which I believe to be World War I. Peter, her successor and nephew, is a German who loves Frederick the Great, the Prussian king and general. Because he loves Frederick the Great, he pulls Russia out of the war when Frederick is about to surrender. If this happens, if the Russians destroy the Prussians, Prussia does not have the influence it does. It does not unify Germany in the next century. Austria probably is the one to unify it, and things are substantially different for the groundwork for World War II, the Great War 100 years later. Germany does not become the superpower it becomes, and the big target and question mark it becomes in the 20th century. The Holocaust is probably not on the table. All sorts of things can change if Peter had not become Tsar, if Elizabeth had lived a little longer, or something like that. Peter is so incompetent that he is overthrown and killed by his wife Catherine the Great's lovers, who accuse him of dying of hemorrhoids. And she becomes the greatest ruler in Russian history, except for Peter the Great. So that anecdote, that big change that Peter gave clemency to Frederick the Great for no other reason than the fact that he was a Germanophile, really, I mean, yeah, it's crazy to me. What would you have done differently in the partition of India? And I'm sorry about the static on the mic. I don't know why that's coming through. Usually we're fine there. Okay, I don't know why that's mute. There we go. Maybe that fixed it. Let me see here. What would you have done differently in the partition of India compared to what British officials did? I don't know. I don't know if it should have been partitioned in retrospect. And you've stumbled on the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we talk about history in a friendly, neighborly manner. Yeah, he did, Jennifer. That's a joke. Americans have always had a fascination historically with taking over Canada. It's kind of a big little brother relationship. It's pretty, it's pretty crazy. Thank you for subbing, Henry. I appreciate that, and hopefully do that if you need. And Harry, you have served me well for so long, and I don't always agree with everything you say, but I love your ability to say it. And yes, so you have gotten your wish. So yeah, let's see here. Politics might be goofy, but that makes it fun. Yes, Jonathan, that's definitely the comment of the day. We have a nuclear fuel enrichment, we being South Africa, and refining facility in Hartbeespoort, close to Johannesburg at NECSA, Nuclear Energy Council SA. Then we have 2 nuclear reactors at Coburg. That's good, but not nuclear weapons. Do they have nuclear power? I'm very interested about that. J.K. Galbraith described the U.S. as private affluence amid public squalor. Where did it go wrong? I don't know if it necessarily went wrong. I would agree. I find that an interesting opinion. There's a lot of private affluence. You've got the 1%, the robber barons. You have a consistent theme in the U.S. of the very rich being able to control large sections of the government and the media and the economy. Who is the most important Egyptian pharaoh? Good history question there. I think that Cleopatra, probably just because she's the last pharaoh and her impact. Tutankhamun obviously revealed. Important is not the same as best. If I were to go to a best, I think Ramesses the Great is obviously one of the easy choices. His building of Pi-Ramesses, his conquest of the land of Canaan, his Egypt basically being at its height in the New Kingdom during Ramesses the Great. I don't think he's the king, by the way, from the book of Exodus, and the Exodus would be the Old Testament itself doesn't identify the pharaoh, the Egyptian ruler. So I would say Ramesses II is probably the greatest pharaoh. Cleopatra might be the most impactful because she has opened the floodgates of understanding Egyptian knowledge, even though she was Macedonian, just happened to be Egyptian culturally. Tutankhamun, Khufu, Menes, who created the Egyptian pharaoh, all of these are formidable candidates. Akhenaten basically tried to turn Egypt into a monotheistic power, and many people believe he is the basis of the Abrahamic religions. So, let me see here. Aniket, hello. Thank you for joining us. Do you think communism is an inherently flawed system that can never work due to human nature? Also, how do we feel about the Three Gorges Dam being a huge weak spot for China? I'm not going to talk about military ideas and an idea of a world war and how it would work, Fox, about any sort of war activity in Gaza or in China. What I will say is this. I do think that there's an inherent flaw in the idea of changing human nature when history tells me that human nature is malleable around the edges and seems completely unchangeable at its core. People change the way they approach certain things, but that doesn't change who people are completely. I think the idea of perfecting human nature, whether it was Nazism, whether it was social Darwinism, whether it was communism, had disastrous effects in the 20th century. And that might be more cultural Marxism than the economic Marxism that Marx intended, but it doesn't matter. So, I mean, the common argument is made that that wasn't real communism and Marx never would have been okay with that. I don't know how true that is, but at the same time, there hasn't ever been laissez-faire capitalism where the market is just completely without restriction. And at the same time, capitalism has never been the term, was used by Marx to apply to his enemies. So even people who are fans of capitalism, which they would usually call it the free market or a money market economy, they are used of a term that is used for their ideology comes from their political opponent. So you talk about a misunderstanding of ideologies and a way people misunderstand. So it happens with both Marxism and with capitalism. Yeah, let me see here. Bella, my favorite piece of Russian history was Khrushchev banging his shoe on the desk of the UN. Crazy but passionate. We will bury you. Basically, Khrushchev, after promising to make the Soviet Union more docile and peaceable after Stalin's persecutions and murders and gulags and all of that, almost destroyed the world through the Cuban Missile Crisis, through his buddying up with Castro, destroyed any chance of the Soviet Union to win the Cold War almost by basically isolating China and all of its resources and manpower. Yeah, Khrushchev really is a fascinating figure. So yeah, let me see here. What's my overall favorite part of history? Oh, that's a great question. I appreciate that, Jonathan. It's hard. It's usually the one I'm studying at the current moment. I find, again, I'm a Russian historian. I find Russia in the 17 and 1800s to be particularly fascinating. Why don't people know that Catholic priests also died in the Holocaust? Why is it monopolized the way it is? The common understanding and narrative is that the Catholic Church allowed the Nazis to do whatever they wanted. This is partly true. The other part of it is that many Catholics sacrificed themselves to save Jews during the Holocaust, and it's not a monolithic sort of event, sort of intent there. Let me see here. Thank you, BBB. I appreciate you. Fox, Harry is not going to ban you. Harry is a reasonable moderator, and he and I disagree, and he hasn't stopped coming here and asking me great questions. So, and Katie, we are answering questions related to history and social studies. Let me see here. Yeah. I should go on Jeopardy. I watch Jeopardy every day. I would love to. No current assembled warheads, but the fuel tech and facilities to make them if there is a need to. We built warheads before, and we have a very advanced weapons research sector, formerly known as Denel. Interesting. So you're ready to go if you need to. Thank you, Anakit. I appreciate that. Foreign governments, include the U.S., use Denel to develop weapons such as they function similarly as what DARPA does. Fascinating. Xander, you always teach me something when you come on here, and I really appreciate that. Thoughts on Pakistan-India war? I don't know how intense it's going to get. I don't think it'll lead to a global world war. I don't quite know who to blame or who to think. I would like to stop blaming people. I would like to just start ending wars, and we just don't need another third foreign conflict with the questions of what will happen. The West doesn't need it, and the Indians and Pakistanis certainly don't need it. Well, let me see here. Being a Russian historian, you must know about the genocide in Ukraine before World War II. I call it World War III, but yes. How do communists reconcile this with this when it comes to being in contrast to core communist tenets? The collectivization of the farmlands that led to the liquidation of the kulaks, the tight-fisted, as Stalin called them, was all in his effort, in his interpretation of Marx, to force that area of the world into communism. Communism is supposed to be achieved under highly mechanized, industrialized societies. Russia was on its way, but not quite there, not even 50%, when Lenin established the Bolsheviks in power and created the Soviet Union in 1922. After Lenin died, Stalin took over, waited for a while, and then decided to implement, basically force Russia to be industrialized so he could achieve a communist society. And although Stalin has often been accused as a traitor to Marx, and Lenin has been accused too, you would not have survived long if you had felt that either of them were a traitor to communism if you had lived in the Soviet Union. Stalin certainly believed he was the fulfillment of Marx's dream. Lenin believed that he was also fulfilling what Marx wanted, just in a different context. They had to amend it because it hadn't caught on in any highly industrialized society. The highly industrialized societies had decided to give and take, with unionization and things like this being far more reasonable than violent upheaval, social revolution, and things like that. So the common Marxist and modern communist interpretation is to look back on those events in terms of a misunderstanding of Marx's original intent. And a lot of people would prefer to call themselves Maoists, seeing Stalin's forced mechanization of the Soviet Union as a misunderstanding and misapplication of communist doctrine. Unfortunately, I don't understand why they bother calling themselves Maoists when Mao killed twice as many people as Stalin did. But Mao took communism and reinterpreted it along the lines of oppress versus oppressor, not just economically, but socially, between the farmers and the urbanites in China. So, let me see here. Yes, thank you, Harry, for taking care of that. I appreciate that. I believe that there was a World War III that the World War II of Germany and Japan is actually World War III. I believe that the Great War is World War II, and I believe the 7 Years' War is World War I. I have a live stream lecture and a video on that. Please go check those out. So if this starts with if India and Pakistan leads to another world war, that would be World War IV. Hopefully that doesn't happen. The SA military forces are a joke currently. This is true, but the private sector technology and weapons development is world class, and our own military just doesn't have a need for it as we are not at war. Interesting. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm honestly asking questions to try to see if you are a communist. No. I give communism its day in court as I do any ideology. But I know too much about history to be a communist. You can guess, Cracked. I'm not going to say exactly. Let me see. The SA private sector was where the first private military was created, known as executive outcomes, and have been the frontline force in many global conflicts, and is the precursor to Blackwater. Interesting. Well, that's more almost like mercenaries then, at that point, Sander. The history of all society is the history of class struggle, Marx. Yes, which isn't true. Because class struggle doesn't always, it's not all struggle, tension, this idea of conflict, which Marxists believe is core to all nature, not just to economics and human society, but all nature's full of conflict and strife and dialectics. Just, it sometimes has been the case, absolutely, but it's not just that. Marx was reinterpreting the French Revolution as a class, as the overthrowing of the monarchical feudal structure by the middle and upper class, the bourgeoisie. The workers still didn't get anything, the proletariat, and that was why the next revolution would be the proletariat overthrowing the bourgeoisie. So, yes, and really it comes, Bella, I think, from a misunderstanding not just of the French Revolution, but of the feudal system itself. People consistently condemn the feudal system, and there are many condemnable things about it that would never work for any of us based on our predilections for how we live our lives now. But the feudal system was not as dismissive and intolerable as people make it out to be, especially for the people who lived with it and under it. I don't know much about Lawrence Wong and the Singapore elections, Harry, so I can't speak to them. Aniket, Pakistan, as I've talked about before, so it's the Pope, it's Pakistan, it's communism. And it's world wars. I've had kind of a repeat session today, but we've had some great questions from great people, and if you've enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe. We're going to be done in just a couple of minutes, but Aniket, and we will be back tomorrow at our normal time, 6 p.m., for the second part of our usual two-part Q&A, Ask Me Anything, where you can ask a historian what he thinks about different social studies and historical topics. And hey, I know not everyone likes hearing about the politics and geopolitics and stuff like that, but it adds some flair and it gets people involved who normally wouldn't be. So it's helping the channel grow, and you can do that too by liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as that. There's also the social media that Hart's put in the chat. I don't know if he's still here, but I really appreciate him and Harry doing that and them moderating. Show them some love before you show yourself out. So Pakistan was established when the British decided to take part of the Indian subcontinent that was dominated by Muslims and give them two sections, West Pakistan and East Pakistan. In 1971, East Pakistan became Bangladesh, and the tension between Hindu majority India and Muslim majority Pakistan has been ever since. So, thank you so much, Shurkin. One of the Griffin jet fighters crashed during an air show in Salihana Bay 4 weeks ago. I did not know that. The kulaks meant tight-fisted, and it was a loose definition applied to any sort of peasant who was able to make his own way by producing and selling crops. The collectivization and the liquidization of the kulaks meant people were deprived of food. The crop yields were much less. The hesitancy to join collective farms, the lack of productivity from the breadbasket of Europe, which was what the Ukraine was, led to mass starvation and the deaths of 5 to 6 million people. So thank you for subscribing. I appreciate that. Pakistan isn't communist. No, I don't know exactly who runs Pakistan. I know it's more a traditional, strict Muslim government, from what I understand. Oh yes, I'm not surprised, Harry. One states, they always have to pretend that they're being fair. Our life, I've tried to retain as much information as possible, and I appreciate you saying that. It's a blessing and a curse. I remember every faux pas I've ever done. Let me see here. Out of all the communist leaders, who do you think Marx would have aligned with most? I think Lenin, maybe Trotsky. Lenin realized near the end of his life that he couldn't spread the revolution globally. Trotsky didn't care if he spread the revolution globally, which, by the way, everyone thinks Trotsky is this unsung hero. Not true. Trotsky was just as brutal as Lenin and Stalin. And whether it's because of bourgeoisie and capitalist resistance in the West or just Marxist aggression in the East, if global revolution and trying to force the world to have communist revolutions everywhere had happened under Trotsky's model of the Soviet Union, hundreds of millions of people would have died in the 20th century. Not just 100 million, hundreds of millions. That would have led to disastrous results, far more cataclysmic. Maybe it would have achieved pure communism. But Stalin actually moderated some of Trotsky's more extreme beliefs in order for the practicality of keeping the Soviet Union afloat. That's why it was called socialism in one country. And I'm not saying socialism is communism. There is a difference between them. But socialist economic policies are usually employed by communist governments, command economies, planned economies, nationalization and control over all industries and fields of economic development that were previously privately owned, the suspension of public property, redistribution of land and resources, all of that stuff. So great question, Lifelike, but I think Marx would have been closest to maybe Trotsky, maybe Lenin, somewhere around there. I think he would have sympathized with what Mao and Pol Pot did in the sense of reinterpreting Marxism, but he never thought of it as anything more than an economic system. He would not have understood cultural Marxism. He would not have understood Gramsci or Foucault's renditions of it, the development of cultural Marxism, and the application of Marxist dialectics to oppressor-oppressed classes, regardless, things that conservatives love to rail on about, stuff like what they believe to be cultural Marxism, such as gender studies, wokeism, things like that. I don't think Marx would have understood that, but I don't think he would have been overly furious with it. And when it comes to race and gender and and treating Jews well, Marx doesn't fill out any of those categories. So, yes, that's true, Anakin. Let me see there. Fazil, hello. You actually know history really well. Well, I am the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, so if you know history really well, consider liking and subscribing. Thank you, Mabel. I appreciate that. Let me see here. Xander saying Dan now also developed the Red Falcon attack helicopter, which was at the time the most advanced attack helicopter in the world, surpassing the Apache. That's interesting. I did not know that South Africa just had this the ability to build militarily. Xander, why is South Africa so advanced in military technology? Who do you think is the greatest presidential candidate that never became president, but that would have been a good president? Henry Clay. I think Henry Clay knew how political American government worked and is one of the best to never become president. Let me see here. Okay, as an Indian Christian, I can say that India is not secular and democratic. What's wrong with Muslims? So we're really getting into the India stuff in the chat. It's very fascinating. Alvalu, great to see you. Thank you so much. Long time. Freshly's here, Nathan's here. Wow, we got an influx of Friendly Neighborhood historians. What's with this strange upperwear? Where is the usual coronation robes? I am not wearing my usual Hugh Hefner smoking jacket. I said that when we got into the hot months in the summer that I would be wearing different things because it would just be too warm to wear. I would be sweltering and almost passing out, and I'm already sweating a lot with this. So, why do you think communism worked economically in China so well in contrast to communism failures throughout history? Communism didn't work well in China. At first, a mitigation of communism always seems to be the only form of it that can possibly work, where the government remains somewhat totalitarian, enforcing a one-party state where the party supposedly speaks on behalf of all people and controls everything. But if you look at the Soviet Union and the new economic policy, when Lenin basically waved the white flag on communism, China did it in the 1970s and 80s with their economic development. Even Castro had to do it a little bit in Cuba after the fall of the Soviet Union. So there's more of a mix. It's not fully communistic as in the way it used to be. So There is definitely capitalist influence. Do you love Rhodesia? I love Zimbabwe. Let me see here. South Africa is actually very advanced. Talk to Xander about it. Is it true U.S. kids used to be the world leaders in education? When Jimmy Carter started the Department of Education, we eventually dropped in the 20s. And elaborate. The United States education has completely collapsed. I'm not going to blame the Department of Education on it, but seemingly, since the 1970s, American education went from being the highest standard to being middle of the pack, even lower in some ways. Illiteracy is up, all sorts of things are up, and the Department of Education hasn't fixed this problem. I wouldn't say it's caused it, but it certainly hasn't fixed it. So, Henry Clay was a scumbag. I don't know what a scumbag is. I'm assuming you mean scumbag. How would the Soviets have done against the Germans if Bukharin and his NEP agrarian policies were followed instead of forced industrialization? Always been on my mind. Fascinating question. As horribly brutal as Stalin's industrialization and the 5-year plans were, at the end of the day, they would not have been able to withstand the Germans without the man of steel making them a steel empire. It's a horrible trade-off. I don't like admitting it, but Stalin's policies saved the Soviet Union from further embarrassment at the hands of the Nazis. But it was close. And the Nazis were very close to destroying the Soviet Union and killing Stalin. We have an extraordinary systems development and tech development sector, and in the previous government, the SA was isolated from the world, so we had to do things for ourselves and build. So isolationism and strong investment in technology. That is why South Africa is one of the emergent economies in the world. That's fascinating, Xander. Yeah, it's 14th. It's not where it used to be. I wouldn't blame the Department of Education, but they aren't doing anything to help right now. Most of the Silicon Valley companies have their software and development in Cape Town because the skills are here, but exchange rate makes us cheaper to do so. So it's offshoring and outsourcing too. Harry, while this is true for high school and below, our colleges are the best in the world, hence why there are huge amounts of Chinese and Indian students in our universities. There is some truth to that. How does pop culture and entertainment factor in the lack of interest in education? More social media, more technology that cable television, then it was the internet, now it's social media, has basically allowed people to learn things that they wouldn't have been able to learn in school, like you guys are using social media to interact with me and learn about history you probably weren't taught about in school. But the truth of the matter is that has led to a lot of people they don't use those means mainly for education, they use them for entertainment and sports and fashion and things like that. And that has created more and more distractions. So great question there. And Oxford and Cambridge are the best universities in the world. The French have a lot of great universities. But the truth of the matter is the American college system is generally considered the best. An ethno-state failed. Interesting. What do you mean by an ethno-state? You're going to have to define that for me. What's your hometown? I'm somewhere in the United States. Go from there. Thank you so much, Messi. I appreciate that. I love Indian history. I love the fascination there. He doesn't say viral. He just says he is from the U.S. So that is all you will get. Yes, I would rather say that I'm not from the U.S. I'd rather people guess. I've gotten Canadian, South African, Russian, and Indian today. So that's interesting. I don't look much like any of those groups of people, but I think people can figure out from the accent that I'm in America, and America is big enough that the United States makes sense. I do not know her. What university did you get your master's from? I do have a master's in history. I am not going to say what it is, and even if I told you where I got it from, it actually wouldn't reveal my location because I got it online. But I do have a master's in history. My thesis was on, which I'm hoping to put on Substack soon. I just have to redact it. I do not watch cricket, but I probably should. But basically, my master's, I can maybe show it to you sometime, was on the Great Game, and maybe you guys can get to read my my master's thesis. An ethno-state like Israel and Japan, where one race dominated the country and foreigners are highly regulated. Let me see here. And you're asking, Henry, can you give me an example when an ethno-state failed? I don't think America is an ethno-state. I don't think Canada, I don't think most of the Western Hemisphere is an ethno-state. When you look at Europe, that's interesting. I think Germany is an ethno-state that has really struggled. It was divided, it was split apart. The Austrian Prussians in the 19th century were in the race to see who could control it. And obviously you have the Great War, and obviously you have what I call World War III, the Nazis and things like that. And then you have East and West Germany during the Cold War. Germany is an ethno-state that has really struggled. I wouldn't say it's failed, but it's struggled. And Israel is another ethno-state that is struggling for different reasons. Alexander was invading India, Messi, but his troops forced him to turn back. And I believe it was the Chandragupta, that empire, would have been able probably to withstand his war-weary soldiers. I have an entire video on Alexander the Great. You can check out. And I believe it's because of his tech capability and geographical strategic position and the entry and control points into Africa, and we produce 38% of the global gold supply. Yes, diamonds, gold, South Africa's always had a lot of that and has always gotten attention for that. Yes, I think I have caught up to the chat. Last week I asked you, what's the only country in South America that has both Pacific and Atlantic Ocean? The answer is Colombia and Chile. It's Colombia and Chile. But SA still has huge issues, rolling blackouts, crime, corruption. Yes. And Fox, here's the lesson in history for all of us, and this might be the best place for me to end here. The truth of the matter is, and thank you, Freshly, for deleting and holding down the chat. SA has issues. The United States has issues. All countries of the world have issues, and this might be the best place for us to end. You can still, despite having wonderful criticism, or not wonderful, but important and accurate criticisms of a country, still find incredible beauty and amazing things about its society, its culture, its infrastructure, its religious activity, things like that. There are incredible things about the Pakistanis. There are incredible things about the Indians. There's a shared heritage there that should be doing more to bring them together. Same with the Ukrainians and the Russians and the Palestinians and the Israelis. It's fascinating to me that these three major wars right now going on in the world, or about to go on in the world, are not between people from totally different areas, but people who have shared cultural, religious, and historical ties. That should tell us something about the inability to see the good in other people's cultures and societies. Not all cultures are equal, not all cultures are right, but you can find right and good in all societies. So what you're saying about South Africa is true, but what Xander is saying about South Africa is also true, and I am incredibly blessed to learn so much from him about that. So thank you so much. Jordan, I appreciate you loving the vids. You guys will hopefully love the one coming out today where I rank the English monarchs. Check out my one from earlier this week where I ranked the presidents. It's an hour. That one was an hour. The English one is 45 minutes. It's a slog, but watching the whole thing and liking and commenting, giving feedback, hitting the notification bell really helps the channel grow, really gets my appeal going, gets us towards monetization, our goal for the channel. So yeah, please go check that out. And I have long form videos dropping every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I have shorts every day as well that you guys can check out, not just pants, but also videos. So, and yeah, we never did the inquiry into the dictatorship. Dictatorships are very good at not getting inquiries. So yes, how do you explain pyramids being built in multiple countries at different times? Similar themes of worship. Ziggurats, pyramids in South America were places of worship. For the Egyptians, it was similar. It was the worship of the afterlife and the worship of the pharaohs coiled into one. So, Henry, there are things in human history, especially ancient human history, that show our commonality as human beings, regardless of what continent we are on. There are more pyramids in South America than there are in Egypt. There are more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Egypt. Xander, keep up your great work at solving that. We believe you. Ashoka the Great. I believe, why do I always forget who Ashoka the Great was? Indian, right? One of the emperors, was it Mughal? That's Akbar. I'm blanking on Ashoka. I used to know. I'm sorry, Messi. Striker, I'm sorry you're too late. It's good to see you, though. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, Chile does have both. Interesting. So so the population has grown. That's good. And yes, make sure to like and subscribe. Humans that think that the best time frame on averaging is 30 minutes across the world in medieval time. That is nuts. All right, we did catch up to the chat, Harry. 84 minutes in, one of the longest live streams ever, but it was a lot of fun. I enjoy going over, and I appreciate people joining us late. We had Nathan join us, we had Fidel, we had Stryker, we had Alavu, some of our best and brightest, the Friendly Neighborhood historians. And yes, and Harry will continue his inquiry into the dictatorship of Freshly Wild as his legend lives on in holding down the chat. Messi, I will look into Ashoka, and we will talk about him. Sorry for sounding ignorant. We will talk about him tomorrow. But yes, make sure to receive notifications. Hit the bell so that you get notified on all of my videos when they drop. And check out the 2 videos coming out today. Or sorry, the 2 videos from this week. My tier videos took me a long time to do, but I really enjoyed them. They were a lot of fun. Interesting. So infrastructure seems to be a big need, Xander. I can see that. The great 3rd century was propagated secularism and made Buddhism propagate to China and Japan, South Asia. Oh, okay. Yes, that would be the Gupta Empire then, or is that, or were those the Mauryaans? Interesting. Basically, forced Buddhism into China and Japan. That would make sense. Those missionaries brought it all over East Asia, and it's one of the reasons why when we think of Buddhism, we think of East Asians and not South Asians, even though Buddhism is an Indian religion, at least the original form of it. All right then. So thank you for sharing that, Messi. I will look a little bit more into him, and we will talk about him tomorrow. Come back tomorrow, get more of your questions answered, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We went early today, but it was well worth it. I really enjoyed all of the conversations and everything. Make sure to like and subscribe on your way out. And then Sunday we will have a live stream lecture, probably with a little Q&A at the end. And we'll talk about both Mother's Day and Father's Day. And thanks to Hars, Sunday after that, join us always 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as I talk about the impacts of the Protestant Reformation. Xander, thank you again for sharing everything about South Africa. Harry, your great questions about Great Britain always are very helpful. I learned a lot from you guys, and hopefully you have learned something from me. Thank you for joining us at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Take care, enjoy your Friday, and I'll see you tomorrow. And remember,